Let's go back to Rahema, who is getting more color from inside the courtroom as it pertains to reaction from Sean Combs and his family. Fill us in.
Absolutely, Anna. The judge has thanked the jurors, and they have left the courtroom. And in fact, the judge has now adjourned until 1 o'clock this afternoon. At that point, this courtroom erupted in cheers. We're hearing that Sean Combs, he got on his knees with his head in his hands in his chair, and he was praying. The family was clapping and cheering, big hugs all around, big, loud shouts of joy, attorneys hugging one another while the prosecutors simply walked past them. And the defense team now has gone into the gallery where the family was seated and hugging the family. The courtroom is now slowly starting to clear. But what we had heard from the judge before the verdict was read, he had admonished everyone to please stay calm, that he did not want any outbursts during the reading of the verdict. But that verdict has been read. The jurors are out of the courtroom. The court has been adjourned until 1 o'clock this afternoon. And that was the signal for this family to rejoice over what they believe is the best part of what this verdict is, that he's been found not guilty of the top charges against him. And as his attorney says, it means he will not be spending the rest of his life in prison. However, we should remember that the prosecution is saying that they're going to be going for the maximum penalty that he could face. And in the courtroom, they were telling the judge that that could be a maximum of 20 years. That would be substantial. But it probably should be remembered that they're going to say that he has never faced charges like this before. And so that might be something that would be considered when the judge does sentence Combs for the federal charges that he was found guilty of just this morning, Anna. But lots of cheers all around in that courtroom.
And a reminder to our viewers and those who may just be joining us, he was found guilty on 2 of the 5 charges. Those 2 charges both had to do with transportation to engage in prostitution. The max sentence for each of those charges is 10 years in prison, is my understanding. Christy, would those run concurrently, or could it end up he ends up 20 years total behind bars?
So the sentence on counts 3 and 5 could run concurrently. There's no mandate that those would need to be consecutive to one another. And again, it sounds like prosecutors are saying that they will seek the maximum term of imprisonment on those counts. And what is important to note is even though he has been acquitted on these other counts, there is at sentencing an ability to consider relevant conduct. So conduct that pertains to the offenses, but is not conduct he was convicted of. The judge can consider that at the time of sentencing. So all of the evidence that this judge sat through over a month of trial here, all of the evidence of that, the violence, of the threats, of just the extortion, the arson, all of that, the judge can consider it in terms of his relationship with these 2 women in transporting them for prostitution. Again, he was not found guilty of those counts, but the judge may consider that relevant to his determination of what the proper sentence will be.
What will you expect this afternoon then in just deciding whether he gets bail?
I think that's hard to say. I think we're going to have to see both sides are going to submit letters by 1 p.m. and the prosecutors are going to be looking now at cases where just convictions for the Mann Act, transportation for prostitution, led to a prison sentence. And by the way, there are plenty. They shouldn't have a hard time finding those because they do exist. Even if you have not had the sex trafficking count with the mandatory minimum, even just transporting for prostitution, those counts do carry prison terms, and people in the Southern District of New York have been sentenced to prison, years in prison, even just on those counts. So expect them to highlight those examples in the letter. Obviously, the defense will take the different tack of saying, look, the jury here spoke up loud and clear. They didn't believe the violence and the threats were connected in any way to the sex acts. And so, Judge, you should disregard that and let him walk. We'll see what happens. It will be interesting. I think it would be incredibly difficult for a judge to have sat through, and this is a wonderful judge. He has been incredibly thoughtful. He's a new judge. He's only been on the bench for about 2 years, but he's been fantastic, really thoughtful, really careful in his deliberations. And I expect, it would be very hard to have sat through this trial and heard what he's heard and say, you can go out on bail. So I expect he will stay detained, but I've been wrong with my expectations before in this trial, so who knows?
Well, it's all, in the hands now of the judge after the jury came out with their verdict. Again, not guilty on 3 counts, the most serious charges that Sean Diddy Combs was facing, guilty on 2 counts of the transportation for purposes of prostitution. I do wonder, because we saw really what triggered these charges was the civil case that was brought against him initially. Could he face additional civil cases or complaints that way? And what about state charges, Catherine, given this was a federal case?
Well, there are actually pending civil suits that are sort of similar allegations with different individuals. State, Manhattan's jurisdiction is solely in Manhattan, so he would have to be charged with acts that occurred in Manhattan if they're not beyond the statute of limitations. I don't foresee that, but I don't speak on behalf of the office, and I have no inside knowledge. But the civil suits, there are a number that are pending, so will always be in jeopardy for those type of actions. But it doesn't involve prison time; it just involves the loss of money.